and welcome to an Indie Author Mindsets podcast guest special. How's that for a mouthful? And definitely harder to say today because I do have a bit of a cold coming on as I record this, so apologies if I sound a little bit snuffly. But thankfully for you, it's not going to be me doing most of the talking because we do have a guest on the show today. I quite often get people asking me by email and in the Indie Author Mindset Facebook group about networking and whether it's worth going to book fairs and events and speaking to local writers and book groups and things like that. And as you know, I'm somebody who doesn't like to give advice on things I don't actually know anything about and which I'm not very good at myself. But I do know a man who is. Dan Parsons is an author and a bit of an expert on networking. Hello, Dan.
Hello, Adam. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, you and I have met a few times at these sorts of networking events, funnily enough. So I think it's probably best if you can tell us from your own anecdotal experience how networking has benefited you and how it can benefit other indie authors as well.
Yeah, so there have been lots of benefits for me from networking. When I started out, it was about 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago now, and I knew nobody in publishing at all. I'd never been to a networking event, so I didn't really know how that worked. Since then, I've met hundreds of authors, I would say probably through online means and offline means. I'm sort of surrounded by a real community at this point, and it's going really well.
Brilliant. So it's not just a case of the community feel, and it's a nice thing to do. It can have some real business benefits, can't it, and some sort of long-term financial implications for your indie author business.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there are lots of financial benefits to networking. Obviously, there are things like if you meet an author who writes in your genre, often authors will have mailing lists. That's one of the staples of marketing. And as they've got mailing lists, they'll have fans who enjoy their work who will probably enjoy yours. So if you and another author get on and you've both got similar fans, then that's an obvious benefit to networking, is that you can help promote each other and get each other's work up into the charts and things. There's also the fact that you can collaborate. One of the most successful books I've been involved with today is a book that I collaborated on. It was an anthology where there were, I think it was 18 authors altogether. And I knew one of the authors. I know that he was thinking about setting up an anthology, and I encouraged him to do so because pretty much I wanted to be involved too. And when you've got 18 authors all working together, you can do a marketing plan that you can't really do on your own, just because there are not enough man hours in a day if you're launching a book in that way yourself. So you can have jobs delegated out to other people. It can go really well, and I think that book got bestseller tags in 3 or 4 countries on Amazon and did extremely well. There's also the fact that you learn quite a lot, which helps obviously financially, because not just the fact that you can make more money by knowing people who know how to make money, but also you can save money, because you never really know which mistakes you're making when you're doing them on your own, because you've got nothing to compare it to. So say, for instance, you're working in MailChimp, for example. I know a lot of people vouch for MailChimp. For me, it was a little bit expensive as my mailing list grew, but I knew other authors. I asked them what they were using, and then they said MailerLite at the time. I know other people use ConvertKit and things like that, and they've all got different price points and benefits. But the fact that you can talk to people who are doing exactly what you're doing and you can see price points and things, they can save you money as well as make you money. So the financial implications of networking are sort of tenfold.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned co-writing and co-authoring there and meeting other authors, and that's it pops into my mind that it's due to networking that I actually started co-authoring my Sam Barker series with Stephen Moore last year. We actually met at last year's London Book Fair, where I bumped into you again, and we had a few drinks.
There are always a few drinks involved.
There always is. Yeah, that is one of the benefits of networking. I must say, the alcohol does help lubricate things a little. And yes, Steve and I got talking about this idea for a series that I had and didn't quite know how to approach it. And as a result, we started co-authoring it. And the first Sam Barker book came out last year. We're working on the second one as we speak. So you're right. There are direct benefits there that you don't often think about or know are going to come up. But it is a long-term thing, isn't it? It's not that you're going to go to one of these events and you're going to meet somebody who's going to say, right, let's do this and make some money now. There can be things that come up in the long term, perhaps months or years later after you've kind of broken the ice by meeting somebody and putting a face to a name.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the way I got onto this podcast, I've mentioned this in the new book, actually, which I'm not sure if you got to that part yet. I met Orna Ross, who's the head of the Alliance of Independent Authors, at an event. And then while at a different event, which was in London, I mentioned that I'd seen you were at the event at the time. We'd never met. And as a result of her knowing you, she then passed me through to you. And obviously, I don't know how long we've known each other at this point, probably 2 or 3 years. But it's led to this, this opportunity of being on this podcast. So it's not even the fact that I knew Orna, for example, very tangentially, that got me, extra opportunities. It's the fact that Orna knew somebody else who would sort of move it along. So often you never really know who is going to benefit you in some way. For example, you could be talking to someone who's a writer, trying to get into script writing. They could then be working on a TV show. They could know a producer, and then they could put you in touch with the host. So you never really know where these networking events are going to lead you, but they sort of bring up opportunities that you might never have considered when you first started out.
And it's rare that they're going to be negative things as well, isn't there? So it's not often that you're going to get a negative experience from networking, apart from perhaps the kind of the shyness and natural reticence that some of us introverted writers might have.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say about shyness, because I think in the author community, that's something that a lot of us struggle with, and we sort of think that we're alone, essentially because we've got quite insular mindsets. But the real thing about it is when you go to these events, often everyone's worrying about their own insecurities so much that they never actually notice yours, and you actually come off a lot better than you think you have. So often, you do a lot better than you think you do. And also the fact that everybody's got different personalities. So just because you might not mesh with some people, you often will mesh with others. Some people are very loud and like to hang out with other loud people. Some people are very quiet and they gravitate to each other because, they might be in a wallflower situation in a party. But then over time, like I've been to the London Book Fair is my closest big city event, and I've been there 6 times now. And over time, even if you meet one person at these events, they'll typically crop up again in the future, and they introduce you to other people. And then a few years down the line, you can walk into a room and you'll know 10 or 15 people who will all happily talk to you and bring you into their circle. And even when you start out, what you find is that a lot of people are not going to cut you down if you think you don't really know what you're talking about at these events and things. What they'll typically do is they'll encourage you to express opinions and to talk about what you do and things, because they want it to go as well as you want it to go, because ultimately they're networking too. So they want to appear to be friendly, and in most cases they are friendly, because they obviously want to see something positive come out of this experience just as much as you do.
So you've got me tempted now. You've got me thinking about London Book Fair. I wasn't planning to go this year, but I am having second thoughts now, I must admit. But if I'm an introvert, which I am, and I know a large number of other writers are, the internet has changed things massively, as we know more than anyone in our industry. Is online networking a reasonable substitute for getting out there in the real world? There are hundreds of Facebook groups, loads of forums and things like this. Of course, got social networking with Twitter, and there are writing circles on there. Is that a viable substitute for getting out there, do you think?
Well, basically, like you said, there are lots of different sites as well. You can use Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They've all got their own uses, and they all appeal to different demographics, so you can meet different people. What I find is that online and offline for me have different uses. Typically, if you try to meet people from scratch when you don't know anyone, and you try to meet writers out in their natural habitats in coffee shops and things, often you can come across as a little bit insane, because you're trying to guess who's a writer and going up to random people who look like writers, and often they're not. They're university students who are avoiding their flatmates. So yeah, I would say that if you're going to do online networking, that's a great place to start. Facebook groups like 20 Books to 50k, or the SPF community, or the Indie Author Mindset tend to be places where lots of people of similar mindsets gravitate to each other. Authors who've got quite a commercial mindset, where they want to do well and often do this as more than just a hobby. They're very easy to approach in that respect, because online bios have keywords, and you can search people out to find, if you want to get in touch with authors or journalists or publicists, distributors, whatever you want to find, you can typically find them online, and they're more receptive to strangers sort of coming up to them, because they're also there to network. What I find is, though, that there's a limit to the depth of relationships you can have on the internet. So like I said, there are some authors that I only know through the internet. My original collaboration that I talked about, that was through the internet. That went really well. We all sort of vaguely know each other now. But it's the authors that I've gone on to meet at physical events that I've got a much better relationship with, because we know each other. Like you said, we've been out drinking. Some people prefer to go out for business lunches and breakfasts and all that type of stuff. And you really get to know people really well outside of the business of being an author. You get to know family members and things. So what I would say is, if you're going to start out network and you know nobody at all, then possibly start with the internet. But you might want to think about long term moving on to physical events. It could be something local. I'm 200 miles away from London. That's probably the biggest local city to me that has lots of big author networking conventions and things like that. And you've got to branch out to these places eventually if you want to work on the world stage, but you can do local ones. Lots of small local book fairs, craft fairs. There are co-book signing events and things like that. You can meet other people. And often you might have to pay for a table, not necessarily at these big conventions, but you certainly got to pay for a ticket. The opportunities you get from that payment, though, is that you meet people who are actively looking to meet other people in their industry, and that can also work out really, really well. So yeah, internet for starting relationships, and then physical world for building them, I would suggest.
Okay. I mean, let's say I'm convinced and I'm going to start going to more of these events and conventions and meeting people in person. You've talked me round. What do I need to do? Is there anything I need to prepare in advance? Do I need to bring anything with me? Things are going to perhaps make me look a bit too desperate, or is it smart to be prepared? What would your advice be as somebody who's done these things hundreds and hundreds of times now?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I would say is, don't go in with the mindset that you want to sell, or you want to make some sort of deal with a certain person at all costs, because often people will sort of sniff out desperation. And also, it's not a good networking strategy. So if you want to network effectively, you need to think of it like a business where you're the employer who's building a team around you. You're hiring people to be your friends, essentially. So you're not literally paying them to hang around with you. I'll clarify that. But yeah, you want to make sure that these people are going to be good for you, and you can also be good for them. So it's a reciprocal relationship. You're not looking for someone in a position of power to continue to hold all of the power and to pick you up. You want to find people who can gradually build your business with you over the long term. So yeah, there are some practical steps that you can take to prepare, but that's one of the mental ones. The practical ones include things like having business cards prepared. It sounds very corporate, but ultimately, when you meet lots and lots of people in one day, I know at some of these events you can meet 50 plus people throughout the course of the day. You all shake hands very quickly. Everybody introduces their names and things, and then often you might remember one or two people at the end of the day.
Especially after a few beers.
Oh yeah, there are people who I've said, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name from last year because it was late in the night, and they went, I'm in exactly the same boat. I was hoping you'd mention it. But yeah, you'll want to take business cards to trade them, so you can take other people's details, just pop them in the wallet or purse and take them home, and they can do the same for you. You can search each other out afterwards and then follow up, which is a good way to amalgamate the two approaches, where you've got offline relationships when you start them that way, and then you move into the online space to maintain them, because not everybody lives close to each other and they gravitate towards these places as a result of these conventions. Another thing that I would mention is that you would probably want to book a hotel. So the first time I ever went to a big convention, I didn't book a hotel. I decided to get a bus at, I think it was something like 4 o'clock in the morning, so I had to get up at 3 to catch the bus. I travelled for 4 hours. By the time I got to the actual venue, I was tired and sweaty, and I'd been awake for hours, and I was carrying a heavy bag full of things that I needed for the day. Later on, I learned that if you book a hotel, there's a bit of a cost associated with it, but the benefits outweigh the costs, quite frankly, because ultimately you can drop off your bag in a hotel room. You can arrive the night before, so that when you wake up, you're completely fresh and close to the venue. You're on your A game then, so you're the most likable you're ever going to be, and also you've got everything to hand without looking panicked and dishevelled. When there are inevitably after parties, because people who run these events also like to run things in the night to make sure everybody's having a good time, you'll want to be able to go to those. And if you travel in via car or bus or train or whatever, then typically you have to leave the same day because you don't have a place to stay, and then you miss opportunities as a result. You might, just as a few extra little pointers, you might want to download the itinerary and the floor plan of some of the bigger events in advance, because when you turn up, you're lost quite frequently. These places are huge, so it's better to know where you need to be, because you've already worked out the itinerary and the events you want to stop off at. I know a lot of these events tend to have talks going on with experts. You've been on some of these panels, and they're often upwards of about 50 at some of the biggest events. So you need to know where you need to be at what times, and just having the floor plan and an itinerary in advance is very helpful for that.
Yeah. You mentioned hotels a moment ago and preparing for those, and I would wholeheartedly recommend that. Even if you do live nearby, it's handy just to be able to kind of crash around the corner, because sometimes things do finish late. But I know that from your own personal experience, you'd recommend not getting a haunted one, wouldn't you?
No, I'm not someone who believes in ghosts, so I'll clarify that early on. But no, last year I had a really bad experience. I think it must have been something I'd eaten, but I had a horrific experience in a hotel where I felt like mid-dream I was visited by ghosts and things. Regardless of how I feel logically about it, I'm not going to go and book that hotel again.
Well, the London Book Fair does do some strange things to people.
Definitely does.
Maybe it was a dodgy pint, who knows. You do have a new book out called Networking for Authors. Is that available across all platforms?
Yeah, it's going to be wide, so... Absolutely. It's going to be a wide book in paperback, ebook and audio. So I'm just getting into paperback now. I've got my ISBNs, but everything else is wide anyway. So you should be able to find it on most big retailers.
Excellent. That's Networking for Authors by Dan Parsons. We're going to put a link in the show notes as well, or a series of links, so that listeners can go and grab that. It's an excellent book. I've read it already. You were kind enough to give me an advance copy, and I can wholeheartedly recommend that. Dan, thank you very much for coming on the show today. And
thank you very much for having me on.
Well, thank you. And as a result, I may well see you at London Book Fair this year.
Oh, I'm always there. At this point, I practically book my tickets in advance. I just know I'm going to be there.
Brilliant. Well, you may have convinced me. So thank you very much again. And thank you to everyone listening again this week. And I'll see you again next week. This episode of the Indie Author Mindset podcast was presented by me, Adam Croft. The theme music for this podcast is by the Caesareans. Don't forget you can claim 50% off any Indie Author Mindset course by entering the promo code podcast at the checkout. Links are in the show notes. For more great tips and guidance, join the Indie Author Mindset group on Facebook.